Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, the two Koreas started talks earlier today on the dates and location for reunions of families separated since the Korean War. Pyongyang's criticism of Seoul's military drills with Washington could prove to be an obstacle in the talks. While the two Koreas work to improve ties, the US has reiterated North Korea must take meaningful steps towards denuclearization for international talks on its nuclear program to resume. Plus, amid lingering market uncertainties across emerging economies, foreign investors are buying up Korean bonds. But analysts warn Korea could be hit hard by a market shake-up due to its heavy reliance on foreign capital. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Officials from the two Koreas have been locked in working-level talks on this Wednesday to discuss the details for resuming reunions for families separated since the Korean War.
The reunions, if held, would be the first in more than 3 years. And for more, we're going to connect to our correspondent Hwang Sung-hee at the Unification Ministry here in Seoul. Hi, Sung-hee, a big day ahead. What details do you have right now?
Today's working-level talks began at around 10 a.m. Korea time, and the morning session lasted for about 40 minutes. Now, no details have been released yet, but this is usually when the two sides exchange their stances on the issue. Now, for now, it is lunchtime here in Korea, so the officials are taking a break to have something to eat. Now, earlier in the day, as he was departing for the truce village of Panmunjom, the head of the South Korean delegation told reporters that he would try to bring home some good news for the divided family members by reaching a positive agreement today. The two sides may have a long day ahead of them as they will be sorting out details such as the date and the location of the reunion. South Korea had earlier proposed holding the event from February 17th to the 22nd at North Korea's Mount Kumgang Resort, but this may not be a viable option anymore as officials in Seoul say they need at least 2 weeks to prepare. Now, another issue is that North Korea will most likely want to push the date back to sometime after the joint military drills between South Korea and the United States that are scheduled to begin late this month. Experts say the North could make a counter-proposal on the reunion dates that would have the event taking place after the Key Resolve and Full Eagle exercises, which end in April.
Sung-hee, we've seen North Korea back out of agreements many times in the past. Is there a vibe that Pyongyang might once again have a sudden change of heart and scrap plans for the reunions?
Now, Mark, that is a very difficult question to answer because, like you said, North Korea is one of the most unpredictable regimes in the world. But yes, North Korea does have a history of breaking promises, and we have seen North Korea walk out of its agreement to hold reunions for families just last year at the very last minute, at the disappointment of hundreds of divided family members. Experts that I've spoke with say that such a scenario is very likely this time around as well. Now, that is if South Korea and the United States push ahead with the joint military drills. They say the North may call off the reunions and blame it on the South for sticking to its aggressive nature despite North Korea's willingness to improve relations. Seoul maintains that humanitarian issues like the family reunions should be dealt with separately from military drills. So there is still a tug-of-war going on between the two Koreas, and we are still uncertain about North Korea's intentions. But one thing to keep in mind is that hundreds of thousands of divided families are waiting to reunite for the first time in more than 6 decades, and time is running out for these very elderly family members to see their loved ones again one last time. Guys?
We'll certainly be keeping our fingers crossed that the two sides can reach a solid agreement to hold the reunions.
Yes, thank you very much for your report. Sung-hee, that was our Hwang Sung-hee reporting on the working-level talks taking place right now between the two Koreas on resuming the long-suspended family reunions. Now, while the two Koreas are moving towards improving relations, there hasn't been much progress on international efforts to denuclearize North Korea.
Washington and Pyongyang remain divided over when and how to restart the stalled six-party denuclearization talks. Our Connie Kim reports.
The United States has once again firmly laid out its demand that North Korea take the initial steps towards denuclearization in order to resume the six-party talks. At a press briefing in Washington Tuesday, Daniel Russell, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, said talks with North Korea should focus on denuclearizing the Korean peninsula and should not be talks for talk's sake. He also said Washington stands ready to negotiate with Pyongyang, but only on the basis of a statement signed in 2005. Under the landmark deal, Pyongyang agreed to scrap its nuclear program in return for security, economic, and energy benefits. However, the North failed to abide by the agreement, carrying out 3 nuclear bomb tests between 2006 and 2013. Russell's comments echo those made by Glenn Davies, the U.S. envoy on North Korea, who said last week that the six-party denuclearization talks will not resume unless Pyongyang changes its policy direction. The U.S. and North Korea remain at odds as Pyongyang has not shown any change in its position in recent years. Speaking in Moscow on Tuesday, the North Korean ambassador to Russia said the chance of resuming the talks was fading away because of Washington's hostile policy towards the North. The six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia have not been held since late 2008. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
A new report from a state-run Chinese think tank says Beijing should consider giving up its policy of unconditional support for North Korea if the regime launches further provocations in the future. Our Paul Yi has the details.
The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences released last month their Blue Book report on the development of Asia-Pacific affairs for 2014. The Beijing-based institute is the highest state-run research organization in the country and is considered one of the top think tanks in Asia. The new report mapped out 3 scenarios for the Korean peninsula over the next 5 to 10 years. It said either the two Koreas would unite, maintain the status quo, or that escalating tensions would result in military conflict in the region. The Academy said that in order to stabilize the peninsula, and in light of greater national interests, China might have to consider dropping its support for Pyongyang. The report stated that in the event North Korea continues to stage provocative acts, Beijing should not adhere to its stance of never abandoning North Korea. According to Chinese experts, Beijing shifted its foreign policy direction on the North after the regime unilaterally went ahead with long-range rocket launches and nuclear arms tests. They say North Korea has become more of a liability than a strategic asset and partner. It's an issue that the Chinese government has been reluctant to discuss publicly in the past, and therefore the release of such analysis was surprising.
This new report from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences deals with how China should respond to the developing changes in Asia-Pacific affairs.
The report also said that there was almost zero possibility of an all-out war erupting between the two Koreas in the near future. The release of this latest national report may suggest that China has a growing interest in unification, while letting its closest ally know that all options are on the table. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Korea and Japan have been locked in a renewed diplomatic spat over Japan's distorted views on history. With relations between the two countries at their lowest point in years, some politicians and ambassadors of foreign countries have joined Korea in calling on Japan to sincerely apologize for its wartime atrocities. Shin Se-min reports.
Politicians and envoys from countries far and wide have been taking Japan to task for its renewed glorification or attempted whitewashing of its past wrongdoings. Influential figures from nations including the United States and Britain have called on Tokyo to issue a clear and frank apology for its wartime atrocities. They specifically want Japan to apologize for its military wartime use of sex slaves and for Japanese lawmakers' continued visit to a war shrine that honors several Class A war criminals. A congressman from California, Mike Honda, recently sent a letter to Secretary of State John Kerry urging him to pay closer attention to the issue of the so-called comfort women who were forced to provide sexual services to Japanese troops during the World War II. Honda has consistently pushed for Japan to apologize, calling it a human rights matter, not something that should just be consigned to history. In his letter to Kerry, Honda calls on him to encourage Tokyo to apologize to the sex slave victims who were thought to have numbered as many 200,000, with many of those from Korea. The letter also points out that more and more are passing away in a reminder that time is limited for the remaining survivors to receive their long-delayed apology. He said that although some believe Japan has already issued an apology, it is clear the Japanese government has not done enough to apologize to the victims. The British ambassador to Japan, Tim Hitchens, also urged Japan this week to admit its historical wrongdoings and to improve its relations with its neighbors. At a conference in Tokyo Monday, Hitchens indirectly asked Prime Minister Shinzo Abe not to visit the controversial Yasukuni Shrine again, saying the best way for Japan to correct its historical mistakes is to admit what it did wrong. Abe visited the Yasukuni Shrine in December last year, marking the first time in 7 years that a sitting Japanese prime minister has visited the shrine. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And Japan is about to stir even more controversy about its militaristic past, this time by submitting an application to register suicide notes and letters written by its wartime suicide bombers on the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. Local reports say officials in the city of Minami-Gyushu are pushing to enlist more than 330 messages written by the kamikaze pilots on the UNESCO list in 2015. The region was a base for kamikaze pilots who carried out suicide attacks against US vessels during World War II. Japan had previously tried to enlist Gyushu and Yamaguchi, where Koreans were forced to work in labor camps during Japan's colonial rule of Korea, as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se on Tuesday said enlisting the industrial sites would go against the basic ethics of UNESCO World Heritage.
Following his ruling party counterpart's speech on Tuesday, the head of the main opposition Democratic Party delivered his keynote speech at the National Assembly on Wednesday. Kim Han-gil vowed to reform politics and push for narrowing the gap between the haves and have-nots. Kim Hyun-ji reports.
Addressing the full assembly and members of President Park Geun-hye's cabinet on Wednesday, Democratic Party chief Kim Han-gil said his party will be at the forefront of reforming parliament and party politics.
We will push for the passage of our bill aimed at preventing lawmakers from abusing their privileges. For this, we will work towards setting up an independent ethics committee that can keep a watch on lawmakers and execute the contents of this bill.
Earlier this week, the Democratic Party leadership issued a political reform proposal that centers around scrapping the privileges of lawmakers and includes having all lawmakers report to an independent ethics committee their plans for overseas travel and commemoration ceremonies for the publication of their books. Kim also called for a rigorous reform of the parliamentary system itself. Specifically, he proposed having the parliament open year-round, operating the parliament's budget committee at all times, and constantly carrying out a parliamentary audit of the government. Kim said his party will fight the government's downsized basic old-age pension plan, saying President Park must fulfill her original pledge to give all senior citizens aged 65 and above 200,000 won, or $185 every month. He also said his party opposes the government's policy to allow hospitals to form for-profit subsidiaries, saying the healthcare sector should be made more public, not less. He stressed that reunification with North Korea is not something that can be obtained overnight.
President Park said reunification will be like a jackpot that has created a rosy fantasy that reunification will come easy and quickly. I am concerned about this situation.
Saying the public needs to agree on how to prepare for a peaceful reunification with North Korea, Kim called for the establishment of a preparatory body, comprised of the government, lawmakers, and civic leaders. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Emerging markets have been hit by jitters caused by the U.S. Fed's tapering of its stimulus, and now mixed economic data from the U.S. and China are complicating the situation. With Korea still belonging to emerging markets, how is the country faring, and is it safe from getting engulfed in future shocks? Our Yurian has more.
Is Korea headed for a crisis along with other emerging market economies, or will it differentiate itself from the rest of the pack? While Korea came under a major sell-off by foreign investors, it still seems to be taking a different path from that of developing economies. The benchmark Kospi of the Korean stock market closed at a 5-month low on Tuesday, and offshore investors sold a net $1.4 billion worth of Kospi stocks in January. But on the bond market, foreigners kept buying Korean securities worth $1.6 billion in the same period, some $200 million more than the amount they sold in the stock market. Korea's credit default swap premium for its sovereign bonds, which shows a country's risk for default, also stands much lower than other emerging market economies, at 75.5. This compares to India's 275.4 and Indonesia's 235.2. Korea also has ample foreign currencies as it has posted current account surpluses for the past 24 months. On top of that, there's Korea's large foreign exchange reserves, which hit a record high last month. Data from the Bank of Korea showed that the reserves reached $348 billion as of January, up nearly $2 billion from the previous month. While Korea's economic fundamentals are relatively sound, its large and liquid stock market makes it easier for foreign investors to cash their investments. Experts warn that since foreign investors hold a huge proportion of Korean stocks and bonds, once they're spooked by a crisis affecting emerging markets, Korea may have to brace itself for a major market shakeup. Yurian, Arirang News.
Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, Korea's two largest automakers, posted record sales in China in January, helped by demand for popular models. The two companies' joint ventures in China say that their combined sales reached a monthly high of more than 175,000 units in January, up 7% from last year. The automakers attributed the record figures to a rise in sales of Hyundai's Santa Fe and Kia's K3. Meanwhile, Hyundai and Kia saw their combined sales in the United States reach over 81,000 last month, jumping 1% from last year. The figure is in contrast to overall sales of new cars in the U.S., which dropped 3% in January from the year before.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Russia has offered assurances that representatives of the Syrian government will attend a new round of peace talks next week in Geneva. The statements came before Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's first ever meeting with the opposition Syrian National Coalition chief Ahmed Jabar in Moscow on Tuesday. The previous rounds of negotiations in Geneva ended last Friday with little progress made. Lavrov said Russia wants to keep regular contacts with the Syrian opposition and is working with all sides to find a political solution to the crisis that began around 3 years ago. Syria also plans to send a large shipment of chemical weapons out of the country this month and aims to have the removal process complete by March 1st. Staying in that region, and Libya says all of its chemical weapons, including bombs and artillery shells filled with mustard gas, have been completely destroyed. A Foreign Ministry official told Libyan state media Tuesday that Libya is totally empty of any presence of chemical weapons which could pose a threat to the safety of people, the environment or neighbouring regions. The elimination of the weapons, which date from the era of former dictator Muammar Gaddafi, is being hailed as a great success for Libya the director of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which helps countries destroy their arsenals, said the eradication of the weapons had been a major undertaking in very challenging circumstances.
Korea is not the only country in Asia dealing with a bird flu outbreak. China is monitoring a new strain of the virus that could be a pandemic threat. Scientists at the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention say that the new strain, H10N8, caused the death of an elderly woman and infected another individual last month. They say the strain is of great concern because it has characteristics that suggest it has the capacity to replicate easily. Experts say there is no indication that H10N8 can pass between people, but that it's a mutant strain that could eventually learn to replicate in humans. The emergence of the H10N8 strain follows that of the fatal H7N9 strain last year, which infected at least 280 people in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, killing around 60 of them. 2 days ahead of the opening ceremony for the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, the symbol of the Games, the Olympic flame, will arrive in the host city on this Wednesday evening local time, ending its 4-month journey. The flame traveled 65,000 kilometers in the hands of 14,000 torchbearers, the longest stretch in Olympic history, climbing mountains, plunging into deep lake, and even making its first journey into space on a Russian spacecraft. With the torch approaching its destination, Olympic spirit is surging, despite the recent terrorist acts in Russia and threats ahead of the big event. The Austrian Olympic Committee said on Tuesday it received a letter that threatened to kidnap 2 of its athletes. Russia and the International Olympic Committee have assured all athletes and spectators will be safe. Following months of uncertainty, Microsoft has named its top cloud computing executive, Satya Nadella, as its new CEO. The tech firm also says Bill Gates will step aside as chairman of the board, but will stay on as a technology advisor to the company. John Thompson, who has been the lead independent director, takes up Gates' old role. Nadella's appointment ends a long search for a new leader after Steve Ballmer announced his intention to retire in August of last year. Nadella is only the 3rd CEO in Microsoft's 39-year history, following Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer.
Okay, well, and now it's time to get an update on the winter weather with our Jian at the Weather Center. Hello there, Jian.
Good afternoon, Mark and Yusen. Well, we've all been using our heaters to keep warm this winter, but did you guys know that keeping the heat on all the time can cause headaches, dizziness, itchy and sore eyes?
Well, it's funny you mention it, Jian, because I actually felt quite dizzy last night. Can you tell us how we can avoid that?
Well, as you probably have guessed, keeping the heat on reduces the amount of oxygen in the air, causing the symptoms I've just mentioned. So experts recommend that you keep your room temperatures between 18 and 25 degrees Celsius and open a window every 3 hours to let fresh air in. But I know it's hard to do that when it's so cold outside. But today shouldn't be as cold as yesterday. Temperatures will be 3 to 4 degrees higher, but upper parts of the peninsula will have an afternoon high hovering below 0. So please dress warmly. And we'll also have some clouds hanging over the peninsula throughout throughout the day. But thankfully, the cold snap should start to ease up a bit starting this afternoon, and it should be gone by tomorrow afternoon. And lucky for us, the mild weather condition is expected to stay with us until the end of the week, but we have one more day of freezing temperatures today, so let's take a closer look at those numbers. The afternoon high in Seoul will get up to -1. Daegu and Gwangju should top out at 2, while Busan rise to 4. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will climb up to 4 in the afternoon. Daejeon will get up to 1, while the top temperature on Mount Kumgang will be at -9. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and let's send it back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Well, thank you very much, Jion, for the weather there, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Join us again tomorrow right here on Newsline at Noon.